I'm David Ault, and I serve as the senior minister or / dean of the Spiritual Council. And how fitting it is that, so many years ago when we left the Woodruff the last Sunday, we had several people who came and shared the stage with us, and one of those people was Dr. Will Coleman. And look, tradition, he's back to share the stage with me again this morning. Please welcome our Spiritual Council member, Dr. Will Coleman. What I love about this amazing being is that we share a comradeship in this, and I'm sure you've heard this quote before. We are here to bring comfort to the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable.
Is that the quote?
And oh my God, are we going to afflict your comfortability this morning? And one of the words that's being tossed around a lot these days is the word bias. And what comes to mind when you hear of the word bias in regards to an unknown, an unspoken, an unrecognized, an unvocalized resistance within us? And I think that for me that's a pertinent definition, that it is a hidden resistance. It is primarily unconscious, that is the veil or the dampening of one's individual growth. And these biases are generationally fed to us, and it takes a certain particularized evolution in consciousness to not only be willing to understand that a bias is there, but to be willing to run towards that bias with a chisel and a nail, and to begin to chip away and to dissolve that bias. So we are here to afflict the comfortability of our biases this morning. Anybody in for that? Anybody want to run right now because the doors are still open? So we are a part of a global organization called Centers for Spiritual Living. I want to repeat that because many of you might not know that. We are not a sole silo entity, but we are a part of a global movement that teaches a philosophy founded by our founder, Ernest Holmes, who wrote The Science of Mind in the early 1900s. And from that was an evolution in teaching these principles. These principles, by the way, which were not new. They did not come from a divine download, and they weren't excavated out of the earth on tablets. They were a synthesis of Eastern and Western philosophy. And it was common of people of that era to bring that synthesized nature. It was an offshoot of the Transcendentalist movement of the 1800s with Ralph Waldo Emerson, which basically challenged one central thing, and that is that we are separate from God. And that challenging of that particular notion is what brought forth the understanding that each of us are a part of a whole and cannot be separated. And just because that is true for all does not mean that you and I are maximizing the benefit of that. And one of the things that gets in the way of the maximizing of the benefit of being a part of the all is our biases. So at this convention, the Convention for Centers for Spiritual Living, where centers from all over the globe come to attend, one of the speakers told a fascinating story. How many of you are of a certain age that you remember Kodak? Okay. Gosh, you're all old. Okay. So Kodak was the company that brought in the revolution of photography and gave photography a vehicle for the common person. Photography now was removed from being a specialized thing into becoming a household activity that one could acquire. And they ran with that and were the top tier of that particular movement, of that invention for many, 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 many decades. And suddenly, technology began to change. And as the board members, the chairman of Kodak sat around a table, and I actually did look this up. Not one woman sitting around the table, all men, sat in their bias and refused to acknowledge the changing times. And in that bias, number one was they were wanting to maintain the 70% and above shareholding of the activity of photography that was taking place in the world. They didn't want to lose that. And the other parts were that they were not willing to look at, to listen, or to engage in the changing of the tide. There were even people who were coming and giving presentations to this particular board saying, here's the technology, here's the next thing, do you want in on it first? And they said no, because they didn't believe that people would give up their little hard physical pictures for something that would be more transportable and digital. And so Kodak became a dinosaur. And Kodak became extinct. And when we start to look at that, we realize that all of us are like chairman of the board of Kodak with regards to our own personal beliefs and biases. And there are constantly people that are walking into the mental boardroom of you who are wanting to challenge and to offer you something new. And how many of us sit there and go, no, I'm good. And I believe you are the one that gave me the perfect word, extinction.
Yes, it's
yes.
extinction.
Extinction. And so this morning, we want to look at this idea of ethics and morality, because maybe this is a stretch, but when we talk about this month's theme about essentials of spirituality, one of those essentials obviously is ethics or morality. Not the morality that we define as trying to be a purist by human definition, but the morality and the ethics of our mentality and of the way in which we show up in the world, and the ethics by which we stay true to the ownership of the fact that you are all-powerful. Because if you and I are not owning up to the all-powerful, if we're not willing to ride the wave of change, if we're not willing to be in that energy system of new technology or cutting-edge sensibility or expanded consciousness and thinking or exposure of bias, then how about this? We are actually immoral. Because the soul of us is not then embracing and running towards our full potential. And so essentials of spirituality has to do with ethics and morality. Ethics and morality with regards to the congruency of what is ours to do. And how many of us are running towards our bias in order to show a light, to shine a light on that? How many of us are running towards our resistance to change? How many of us are so aiming for comfortability rather than cutting-edge sensibility? And that's something for us to look at. And one of the reasons why I love that you're here is that you did that. You did that with your own tenured professorship, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I said that. Yes, I did.
How's that working for you?
Reluctantly and slowly. It's working wonderful now. I grew up in working class colored community in Memphis, Tennessee. And I grew up in a world that was very much surrounded by religiosity. My parents were my grandparents. And so I had a natural inclination towards spirituality, in a way of speaking. And I went to a college there, Presbyterian school, Rhodes College it's called now. I was a religion major there. I left there, came to Decatur. I went to a Presbyterian seminary for 4 years, got my master's degree. And then I left here and went to the Republic of Berkeley, as I always call it, and got my PhD with honors at the Graduate Theological Union. So in one sense, everything that I was geared towards and trained to do, it wasn't an easy slate, I won't say that, because there were integrals between when there was some up and down times, but I still was pretty much on a track. And I received tenure in 4 years, fastest at that institution anyone had ever done so. And I remember vividly the day that my tenure was announced by the chairperson of the board, and how everyone was applauding that I had gotten tenure, African-American man at a predominantly white institution, tenure in 4 years, et cetera, et cetera. And inside of me, I can say it now, I was feeling very bad. I felt trapped. And I remember saying, now you are trapped. And I found a way to work myself out of trap with cooperation. You know, sometimes we do things that are not in our best interest because we don't have the courage, but we get others to co-opt into helping us move forward. Well, I did that act. And then I discovered something. I discovered that I had to make a distinction between and live out the distinction between what I was trained to do, even though it was my interest, and what I loved doing. You hear the difference? Trained to do, love doing. And it took about 10 years to get to the place where I recalibrated myself to recognize that everything that I was trained to do had to be translated into what I love doing, and to do it freely. I remember also a voice saying to me when I left the seminary, now you have tenure to be you. Now you have tenure to be you. And I think about those moments when I first began to teach online, for example, and I think I've shared it before. When I first began, there was another voice that said, you're a fool. Nobody wants to hear this stuff you're talking about. No one's interested. First class, I announced there were about 10 of us courageously online. But I continued to teach and record those lessons, even though I didn't know what I was doing, and sometimes I was shaking like this. And then about 18 months later, another voice said, how many lessons have you recorded? And I sat up in the bed. And I realized I had recorded not just lessons, but I had recorded them in a particular categories, consciously and subconsciously. And then the voice said, now you have your own seminary. And I've lived by that ever since. No fears, no worries. I intentionally said I had to discover that. And I discovered it in the midst of what was the most, for the time, most traumatic experience. Leap off the cliff with what you had. And blessings to my father and my mother. My father said to me on one occasion, after I left the seminary, he said, son, how is your business going? And I looked at him, it was at a family reunion, I looked at him like, okay. And he said, keep working at it. He said, keep working at it, it's gonna happen. Just keep doing what you're doing and it's going to happen. So I got the encouragement from the elder and from the ancestors, of course. But the takeaway is, looking at it now, discovering the difference between what you are trained to do and what you love doing. They're not separate. They're connected. But the attitude and the disposition and the translation into action, i.e. ethics, because that's what ethics is, translating what you think and feel into action and into consistent and persistent action is all the difference in the world. And so I'm here with you now because I listened to the voice that said, go this way. Because this is what you love to do, and this is who you really are. It's not that the other was bad. That guaranteed salary such as it was every year, was wonderful. The guaranteed position, the title was wonderful. But that wasn't me. I was not being true to who I really was. Now I am, and it's wonderful.
There was another observation that you shared. I don't know if you want to share it here or
That's
not.
fine. You're bringing it up, and we're going to share it.
But you said when you
if it hits the ground, I'm going to blame you.
I know. I'm good at that. So When you looked out over the landscape of those who were teaching and preaching, and you made an observation, do you remember what you said? What you saw before you in the mindset of those men, those pastors, and you said, I don't want to become that.
Oh, yes, that was a different point. This was about getting older. And I remember being at a particular meeting and just feeling and experiencing the tension of holding on to tradition in a particular way. And I remember, again, my voice saying, I don't want to become a grumpy old man. Again, it wasn't a critique. I'm talking about, I don't want to become a grumpy old man. But I realized this, in order not to become a grumpy old man, I had to do something different. I had to reinvent and remake myself. I had to become available to risk and fear. I had to let go of certain aspects of traditional ways of thinking and being and be open to innovation. Be open to what's not written, what's not scripted, what's on the horizon, what's in the fog even. And again, that's another way of thinking about how one gathers from the best of what you have come to know at that moment in your life. And at the same time, be open to the best of what you have yet to know and experience. Mm-hmm. Because the future is always coming towards you. Run to it. Mm-hmm. Run to it.
At this Center for Spiritual Living conference, one day was the ministers' convocation, where all of the ministers gathered together, and then we were put in groups of 5 and 6, and we had to discuss what is going on in our communities. And after, and I'm there, and it's my turn, and I give a synthesis. And I was very careful over the week in California when people would come up to me and go, "What are you doing?" And I would say, "How much time do you have?" Because I don't want to just give you an overview, because this model deserves every nuance and every exploration of it. Otherwise, I'm not doing this model a great service. And I would clarify that every single time somebody would, stop me in the elevator, or stop me at the food, or stop me anywhere, because that was constant. And so in that group, I prefaced that when it was my turn, and I gave them this synthesis, and I said, but please understand there's much more to this. And their jaws were like on the floor, and they were going, do you have a card? Or can I call you? And when there was time after that breakout for all of the pockets across the ballroom to share, 80% of all of those who talked about what was going on amongst that circle, all of them were seeking some new format or change. 80% were looking for something, and you gave me a perfect word for that, and that was adaptability. Yes. Adaptability or extinction.
Yes.
And one of the things, extinction is a strong word, but when we are not willing to look at our resistance or our bias, would you say that we are headed for extinction?
Yes. We're in this room because our ancestors adapted. As far back as we can go, we're here because our ancestors adapted from humanoids, anthropoids, to Homo sapiens. And we can't stop adapting. If we don't continue to adapt, we will become extinct. Because nature, we talked about this too, nature has an almost ruthless character about pushing things forward.
You said nature's not polite.
She's not polite. She's not polite because she doesn't have to be polite. She has an agenda of evolution and, if necessary, revolution. So adapting to, not as a victim and not as helpless and harmless, but to go inside of one's own particular genius that she put there, allows us to move forward individually and collectively. And if we don't, we simply die and become extinct. And maybe there'll be a plaque somewhere, maybe not, that we once lived here. Ask the dinosaurs when you put them in your gas tank today.
So
y'all hear what I said? You ask the dinosaurs when you put them in your gas tank today.
So Henry David Thoreau said, don't look back unless you're going that way. And so the aim is forward.
Just a word on that, because I saw your quote.
Yeah.
That illustrates the point. We have not evolved with the eyes in the back of our heads. We have evolved with our feet and our eyes going forward. And that's where we need to go. It's very difficult to walk backwards. You can do it, but it's different. You got to walk forward.
And as we look at then ethics or an ethical living, we pulled out some of the mandates that are fundamental to this from our book of the month, The Essentials of Spirituality. And the first one was do no harm. Do no harm, which is derived from a Latin phrase which has been adopted by multicultural activities and groups and organizations worldwide, but it's also supposed to be the fundamental motto of our healthcare system.
Let's remind them.
Do no harm. And so do no harm also has nuance, because if we enable people in their bias, then we are harming them. If we refuse to become a part of conscientious disruption, then we are actually doing harm. When we look at those teenagers from Parkland, Florida, who are standing up.
Okay. Yes.
And absolutely refusing to be silenced.
Yes.
And if we don't align with them, then we are a part of the continuance of harm. Mm-hmm. Bias is doing harm. Mm-hmm. A lack of self-inventory is doing harm. Mm-hmm. And so when you and I are more invested in being comfortable rather than running towards change, then are we on the right side of this idea of do no harm?
Mm-hmm. No, we're not. When we were lighting the candle here, Penny, and you were talking about Gandhi and King, let us remember that King and Gandhi's philosophy was nonviolent, direct action. That's important. It was not nonviolence alone. It was nonviolent, direct action. That's a powerful distinction. King realized that what they were engaged in was a form of warfare. And his strategy was to expose what was hidden under the surface so it could be rectified. And that's what justice is. Justice is simply the Hebrew word zadik, the Greek word dikaiosune. It means to adjust and set straight what has become crooked. And remember I told you before, to sin is to miss the mark. That's what it means, to miss the mark. So when you miss the mark, you don't keep going in that direction. You change that GPS if you need to and put it back over here. You know, you go down on your GPS and sometimes it takes you away, out of the way, and you say, oh no, I know a better street. What does it do? It reroutes. So you got to help it. Sometimes you have to help things reroute. Get on that right path. And so when we honor King and others, Gandhi, etc., we don't leave out the part where they said it's nonviolent direct action. That's what the babies are doing in Florida. They're applying direct action to what's affecting them now and their future. They know this. They're not going away. They're the future. And they're not going to be dismissed or not remembered. They are clear about that. And I will follow them. I don't know about the rest of you, but I choose to follow them. They're my grandbabies. And I have grandbabies. So I see my grandbabies. I'll follow them.
The next one is communicate to heal. Again, don't misconstrue that communication as being soft. Communication to heal is direct communication. Communication to heal has an aim and a purpose. So how many of you have actually listened to these teenagers, Emma Gonzalez for one, standing up and addressing Congress and addressing these people over gun reform, and their communication is not solely rooted in anger and vitriol, but it is communication to heal. Because they have direct understanding, as many of us in this room probably have direct understanding of the inhumanity that is experienced within our cultural species. Communication to heal is not enabling. It's not patting on the back and saying it's going to be okay. It's direct aim and understanding that things, like you said, need to be called out. Need to be called out. And so David Bowie, I mean, remember David Bowie and his song, Changes. There was that lyric that said, and these children that you spit on, as they try to change their worlds, are immune to your consultations. They're quite aware of what it is that they're going through.
Exactly.
They're quite aware of what it is that they're going through. And so one of the things that I so admired what you had said this week as we were talking about this is that we need to follow them as much as, hopefully, they will follow the sage wisdom of those who have gone through some other similar things. That there needs to be a congruency or a relationship established. It isn't fair for us to put all of the responsibility on them to be the ones to change. We must also have the same fervor and the same aim and the same commitment as that. So let's bring that back to our spirituality. How many of you are willing to stand and communicate to heal to yourself? First and foremost, exactly. About what it is that needs to shift with regards to our choices and our talking and our social circles and what it is that we're doing that is not any different than perhaps what they were when we first moved into this building. I may have shared with you one of the greatest heartaches of my job is observing people who are still where they are when I first got here so many years ago. And part of me must take responsibility for that. Because if I don't, then I'm like a tenured professor who's just allowing myself to be comfortable. And each of us then becomes a conscientious disruptor of that comfortability in order to bring ourselves to the cliff's edge and say, no more. That's what those teenagers are saying. Hashtag no more. No more. No more. Black Panther. I went.
You did? Yeah. How many of you seen it? Go see it. Go see it.
So
see it.
The father, as we learn in the narrative, has committed an act, and so the son rectifies that.
Spoiler
now
alert.
you don't need to go see it.
Spoiler alert.
But that narrative of generations having to rectify, and generations having to rectify is something that is ongoing culturally and within our species, right?
Yes, and so I'm not going to give any more spoiler alerts.
I didn't spoil anything. I didn't spoil it that bad.
But I will say this. There is a commentary by the director where he talks about one of the scenes in the movie. He's describing particular scenes. And he uses two words that are important for this conversation. He says that this particular scene depicts the balance between tradition and innovation. It's not that they're diametrically opposed. They need to be a balance. There's a place and an honor and respect for that which has been handed down. That's what the word tradition means, tradition. But there's also the need for it to be balanced with and in a dance in conjunction with that which is new, to innovate. So those two pieces, again, with our younger generation, the reason I say I'm going to follow my grandchildren is because they are innovating. And at 64 years old, I feel young staying around the innovators as well as I do honoring the tradition. My grandfather, my father, my mother, etc., but my grandbabies. It's in between those two places that you keep life and vitality, or both. It's the best of both worlds. I love it. Yes.
And the last point, which I think is the most crucial and probably the most difficult one, is righting a wrong. And I said to you yesterday, I said, what would you, as an African American man, want to hear sincerely from the rest of this cultural abnormality that would make a difference? And I brought up a very sensitive subject because I said, and this is what we don't talk about. When we think about the beginners of this movement, those prolific writers of the 19th century and the 20th century, which include Ernest Holmes, do you realize that 99% of those writers were white men? Okay. Nothing wrong with being a white man. But,
it's okay. It's all right.
But how do you, and that does not strip away the effects of the philosophy and the mental science of cause and effect, but to try to teach cause and effect to the disenfranchised from the lens of white men authors creates a disparagement.
Yeah, we talked about that. We sure did. Because if you think about Ernest Holmes, Charles Fillmore, etc., the ones that I teach on Monday nights, they were nevertheless under the umbrella of WASP. And that was a particular category in the early 1900s. White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant was the norm. And hence, anyone who came here, not only if they were a person of color, but if they came from certain parts of Europe, they had to change their names. You know this. Some of you did it. They had to change their names to make them sound more WASP names. John Wayne is not John Wayne. That's not his name. He changed the name to assume an identity that might fit that norm. So with that being said, persons like Ernest Holmes, Charles Fillmore, etc., they were writing also under protection, if you will, and also under the umbrella of all that was accrued to being white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. In a culture, even then, in a world even then, that was pluralistic and diverse. Pluralism and diversity are not new. It has always been that way. But the recognition of it and the collaboration has not been there. And so this is what we were talking about. It's how do we redeem that real history that simultaneously, hard to say, but they were writing during the decade of lynching.
It would be hard to teach a class to those who are having to fend for their lives.
Yes.
In that way.
So you have to bring both into view so that you have a more sober, balanced, and hopeful future. It's not one or the other, but it's sober, it's balanced, and it's hopeful. Inclusive of and also beyond. You know the tradition. It ain't all good. Tradition ain't always good. All right? For everybody. But you're also willing to do what? And this is the word I said, courage. It's about courage. What I love about the young people in Florida, they are expressing courage. Their grandmama, granddaddy, mama and dad in a certain way have not been expressing on this issue. Y'all know what I'm talking about. On this issue. A fixation on violence and a fixation on guns that is just it's unfathomable to me. The obsession about it. But these babies are saying, no more. No more. And that's what the rest of us need to say. No more. Nonviolent direct action is the key.
And so righting a wrong, and I loved what you shared. I said, what would be the pivotal solution for that? And we talked about gentrification. Remember what you said?
Yeah. See, he's getting married to say all kinds of things this morning. Yes.
Throwing it around.
So, gentrification, and I love Atlanta. I came here in the 1980s to what we called in our culture the Black Mecca. and all of the wonderful things that are taking place in Atlanta since then and now. At the same time, I do have to wonder, in the midst of all the transformations that are happening with the buildings going up and et cetera, what happens when the people who were there first lose that low tax base because of what's being innovated, and the tax base goes up, and they disappear? They don't just move out. And there's no discussion. I said this, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was some type of town hall meeting or discussion among those who have this knowledge and resources to let the ones who are already there know that we could collaborate on this? This is how we got this bank deal. This is how we got this business cut. And this is how we could work together on this economically, versus you just become displaced. And we don't know where they are, but they're somewhere. Where are they? That's justice. That's right. They're back out in the suburbs. Now they can't get back here because they don't have the transportation modalities and infrastructure to do so. You know, it's a bait and switch, isn't it? I don't know. Let's think about it. You leave the city, that then your grandchildren come back. And it's not that it's all bad. It's how do we collaborate? So that it is truly a gentle and just transformation for all involved. Yes.
And righting a wrong then is that as any of us gains that knowledge, we share that knowledge.
Yes. Yes.
As any of us gains and excels in consciousness, we share the methodology of that. We begin to mentor, and we allow ourselves to be both student and teacher simultaneously to all of the generations that are there. That we open ourselves up to be able to listen and to also teach, instead of gathering what's ours and running away and holding on to that. And that is the freedom that busts that gentrification ceiling. And so those three things, if it was ours to do, how would we right that wrong? Number one is we would create that gathering place where we would allow people to talk. How would you teach these principles to people who are in pain? You wouldn't just stand up here and teach these principles. First of all, you would have to have days and days of just allowing them to talk, to listen. And then after that listening, we would begin to engage in solution-driven conversation. And then after that solution-driven conversation, then we both, hand in hand, would create genuine action that would involve everyone. That is righting a wrong. That is what didn't take place to those who came and took this country. That is what happened to those who were forced to build this country for others. And the only way in which we end that particular level of separation is to right that wrong. How do we do that? You do that first within your own mind and heart. You give what it is that you have to someone else who doesn't. And we begin to collectively share all of that together. So I would like to think, as we look around, I want you to look around at the walls of this room. Was there ever a moment in this room that you had an aha? I want you to reflect on that for a moment. Everybody look around. If this is not your first time, that you've been in this room many times, I want you to look around. I want you to feel the seat underneath you, and I want you to say thank you to the physical space and the collective intention that allowed you to have that aha moment. So go ahead and do that real quickly. Yeah, put your hands out. Wave it around at the walls. If you had one of these chairs, you could do this. Now I want you to look around, and maybe if somebody's near the lights, they could raise the lights up a little bit. And I want you to look around, and I want you to see if there's anyone in this room who was a facilitator of you having an aha moment.
Yeah, everybody.
And would you just somehow reach out energetically and acknowledge them and thank them for that? Was there a class or a teacher that happened within the walls of these buildings that righted a wrong within you, that allowed you to take a stance of do no harm, that allowed you to expand your communication of healing? I want you to just look around at anybody who was involved in that and say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I want you to stand up because we're going to do a prayer of release. So whatever direction, so some of you face all the different directions, the north, the south, and the east and the west. Whatever feels right for you, you can pivot you don't have to look up here, but look in all of the directions. And I want you to know this with me. I give abundant thanks for all of the innumerable lessons, all of the innumerable energy and vibration that has transpired under this physical roof that we call Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We know that this physical address of 1730 Northeast Expressway served us in beautiful ways. It was, in many ways, a part of an ongoing birth. An evolution that never ceases to happen. And we find within us the opportunity to not only thank what has transpired in these near 7 years as we have been available to this space, but to also give thanks to the shoulders of the teachers and the shoulders of the founders of this philosophy, whose energy was also with us as we did our work. We begin to forgive ourselves of any silo thinking that tells us that we are alone, that we are on a terrain as a lone soldier, but that what we are traveling comrades in an evolution, a spiraling up of opening hearts and transforming minds. That the idea of reawakening all to their spiritual magnificence, to the idea of the vision of revealing a world that could possibly work for everyone, has had its roots and its genesis in this very room. That Atlanta is just as much a touchstone to the world and to the needs of the world as any other place on our planet. And that our individual and collective hearts are just as much a touchstone and a foundation of the healing of our division as any other heart and any other individual in any other community that graces this planet. And so we have done good work.
Yes.
And good work never ceases, but good work spirals into great work, and great work spirals into genius.
Yes.
And so we affirm now, individually and collectively, to not inhibit that spiraling up, but in the own boardroom of our hearts to say yes to whatever innovative way will bring a philosophy that heals, that empowers, and that transforms every single person to the greatest bandwidth of exposure possible. And what's so beautiful is we don't wait for others to do it for us, but that we travel out upon the skinny branches, for we are told that it is there that we find the fruit of our labors. May we all be willing to travel together on these branches of exploration, knowing that there is nothing other than success that waits for each and every one of us. If you are in agreement with this, I ask you to do a full 360 as you look around all of the walls with your outstretched hands and you just simply say, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
And together we say,
And
so it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
Hi, I'm David Ault, and I simply want to say thanks. Thanks for taking the time to watch our broadcast here at Spiritual Living Center of Atlanta. We have a vision, and that vision is to reawaken all to their spiritual magnificence. And one of the ways that we are able to do that is through this very medium of broadcasting. So if you got anything out of this, if you felt in any way inspired, or if something spoke to you directly, then I extend an invitation to you to become a part of our family by donating. And there are many ways in order for you to be able to do that. One is to simply go to our website at slca.com, and there you will find all different kinds of prompts that will help you support what it is that we are doing here in Atlanta. One way is to become a pledger. That means that you decide on a monthly basis that you are going to help us with this vision. Another way is to donate through our management system called Fellowship One, another through PayPal, and another even easier way is on your cell phone. You can do what's called text to tithe, and that number is 404-796-7030. Again, thank you so much for your support, and I invite you to come back weekly to see what it is that we're up to. Blessings.